Good stuff. And oh my God, okay. Defense, that's what I'm talking about.
Hold on, Stephanie White just called Caitlin Clark great with her whole chest, on camera, into a microphone, in front of reporters. She said, and I need you to hear this clearly, I thought she was great. She's an emotional player, and it's one of the things that makes her great, and I thought she channeled it in a way that needed to be channeled for us to be successful. She talked about Clark's physicality going to the rim. She talked about her defense. She gave a full, composed, specific, substantive public endorsement of her franchise player after a dominant 22-point performance against an undefeated opponent. And the internet looked at that press conference and said, who wrote this for her? I'm Dre Fiver. You're locked in with Street Hoops, and today we are pulling every single thread on what has been the most chaotic, most revealing, most institutionally consequential 72 hours the Indiana Fever organization has produced this entire season. Because what happened this week was not just a press conference, it was not just a good game, it was not just a league warning and a fine landing on the same organization in the same 7-day window. It was all of those things happening simultaneously, feeding each other, amplifying each other, and producing a moment that tells you more about how this franchise actually operates than any individual game result this season. We are going deep today. Stats, film, institutional behavior, the viral quote that broke the internet, the league's enforcement record, James Boyd energy, all of it. Let's go. Let's start with the basketball, because the basketball is what made everything else unavoidable. Caitlin Clark just dropped 22 points on an undefeated Golden State Valkyries team that came in with genuine defensive sophistication and a legitimate claim to being one of the best units in the league. She was making shots from distances that most guards in this league won't even attempt in practice, let alone in a competitive game against a team with a winning record and something to prove. She was finishing through contact. She was locked in defensively in ways that her critics have been dismissing all season. Indiana won 90-82. And through 6 games this season, the numbers Clark is putting up are not a narrative. They are a statistical reality that the MVP conversation cannot responsibly ignore. According to game logs and league statistical reporting, Clark is averaging over 24 points per game, 9 assists per game, and 5 rebounds per game. She is shooting 44% from three-point range over her last 4 games. She is the primary offensive engine of a team that has won 4 of their first 6 contests, including victories over multiple Western Conference opponents. Those are not soft numbers against soft competition. That is elite production against a real schedule. Now, and I'm going to address this directly because I believe in giving you the complete picture, the turnover number exists, and it is real. 6 per game, 36 total through 6 games. That is the highest turnover rate among any player currently in the MVP conversation, and it will be the central argument made against her candidacy when ballots are cast. But here is where the analytical honesty matters, because dismissing the turnovers without context is lazy, and defending them without accountability is equally lazy. Clark's turnover numbers are not the product of careless ball handling. When you watch the film, and I mean actually watch possession by possession, not just glance at the box score, the turnovers are concentrated in specific situations. High-pressure creation moments where she is the only available offensive option. Transition sequences where her supporting cast's positioning doesn't match her tempo. Late shot clock improvisations where a functional secondary creator would have already received the ball 3 seconds earlier. Those are not individual failures. Those are system failures. Those are the mathematical consequence of running your entire half-court offense through one person against defenses that have scouted that exact tendency and built schemes specifically to exploit the moments when she has to improvise alone. The turnovers drop when the system around her gives her somewhere to go. Right now, that infrastructure is inconsistently there. That is a coaching and roster construction issue, not a Caitlin Clark issue. Now let's talk about the institutional situation, because this is where this week became genuinely historic in terms of what it reveals about how the Fever organization is functioning right now. In a single 7-day period, the Indiana Fever received 2 separate formal disciplinary actions from the WNBA League office. 2, in 1 week, from the same organization. The first, and we have covered this in detail on this channel, was the formal warning issued to the franchise regarding the handling of Caitlin Clark's injury report prior to the Portland Fire game. The documented sequence is not disputed. Clark did not appear on the mandatory 5 p.m. pre-game injury designation. She was scratched approximately 1 hour before tip-off. Fans who had made financial commitments to attending that game bought tickets, arranged travel, planned their evening. Did so without access to information the league requires teams to make public. The WNBA reviewed the situation, found the conduct non-compliant with collective bargaining agreement requirements, and issued a formal institutional warning. That warning now sits in the organizational record. It establishes the evidentiary baseline for any future compliance question. The next reporting irregularity does not get evaluated as an isolated incident. It gets evaluated against a documented prior warning. That distinction matters enormously. The second action was a fine issued to Stephanie White herself for public comments, criticizing the officiating, specifically statements characterizing the physical treatment Clark was receiving on the court as insufficiently addressed by referees. Now, I want to be clear here. A fine for officiating criticism is the league's standard enforcement mechanism applied uniformly across the league. It is not unique to White or to Indiana. But two formal league disciplinary actions against the same organization in the same week is an objectively documented organizational fact. Whatever the independent merits of either underlying situation, the combined institutional record being created for the Indiana Fever in this specific 7-day window is not a minor footnote. And it was in the middle of all of this. The warning on the books, the fine being processed, the national media documenting the organizational pattern, the fan community running side-by-side press conference comparisons with the efficiency of a distributed research operation, that Stephanie White stepped to the podium after the Valkyries game and said Caitlin Clark was great. The fan reaction was immediate, unified, and merciless in its institutional memory. Posts circulated within hours of the press conference. One read, and I'm paraphrasing here to keep it clean for voiceover, essentially, "Can someone print out something nice about Caitlin Clark so she could say it?" Another said the compliment rolled off the tongue like drinking pure vinegar. A third, more economically, "She got the memo, huh?" The interpretive framework across that entire wave of fan response was remarkably consistent. Nobody needed to be told what to think. Nobody needed an editorial framing the situation for them. The audience that had been watching this unfold for weeks looked at that press conference and independently, simultaneously, arrived at the same conclusion. This is an organization adjusting its public posture because the external pressure reached a threshold that made continued defiance operationally untenable. That is not a fan overreaction. That is institutional memory doing exactly what institutional memory is designed to do. These are fans who watched the Washington Mystics game earlier this season, the game where Clark scored 17 points in the fourth quarter alone, personally erased a 9-point deficit to force overtime, and delivered by any objective measure the most consequential individual quarter any Fever player had produced to that point in the season. And they watched Stephanie White's press conference after that game offer a generic characterization of team resilience, without naming Clark once. That performance was documented by national media outlets. The omission was covered explicitly. The fan response was sustained and pointed. The same fans who watched that press conference watched the Valkyries press conference. They remembered. They compared. And the comparison did not require any editorial assistance. It was self-executing. Now let me get into the moment that broke the internet this week, because I would be doing you a disservice if I let this script go by without addressing the quote. Caitlin Clark was asked during a media availability about Stephanie White's defensive expectations for her this season. Clark's answer included one word that detonated across the sports internet like a depth charge: insane. She described the standard as insane, and she said it while genuinely laughing. Not performing, not posturing, not setting up a soundbite. Genuinely laughing the way competitive athletes laugh when they are characterizing a demanding standard they actually respect. The tonal context was completely clear to anyone watching without an agenda. She was not complaining. She was not throwing shade. She was not initiating a public conflict with her head coach. She was describing a high standard with the warm appreciation of someone who is motivated by it. But here is the thing about timing, and here is why Caitlin Clark is smarter about the media environment than people give her credit for. She used the word insane to describe her head coach's expectations during a week in which that same head coach had received a formal league warning, a league fine, sustained national media scrutiny, and a widely circulated reading of her post-game press conference as organizational damage control. In that context, in that specific week, with that specific accumulated news cycle as the backdrop, the word insane resonated in ways that operated completely independently of what Clark meant by it. The internet understood this. The engagement metrics on every post using that quote reflected it. And I'll say what I think plainly. Clark almost certainly understood that the timing would produce that resonance. She is not naive about the media environment she operates in. She is not oblivious to how words land in context. The choice to use that specific word, in that specific week, in response to that specific question, that is its own form of precise communication. It is plausible deniability with perfect comedic timing. She said nothing wrong. She meant nothing negative, and she absolutely knew what would happen when that clip hit the timeline. That is a level of media intelligence that most 23-year-olds do not possess. I see you, Caitlin. Let me spend a moment on the broader organizational picture here, because I think there is a story being told by the sum of these parts that individual incident coverage misses. The Indiana Fever right now have a positive record. Their franchise player is producing at an MVP level. Their fan base is one of the most engaged and analytically motivated audiences in the entire league. They have a genuine opportunity to build something special this season and to cement Indiana as a destination franchise that defines the WNBA's next era. And simultaneously, they have a documented league warning on the books for reporting compliance failure, a head coach managing 2 disciplinary actions in 7 days while navigating a public trust deficit with the fan base she most needs to retain. A press conference culture that has produced enough notable omissions that fans are now archiving footage and running side-by-side comparisons with basic video editing tools as a matter of civic responsibility. And a national media narrative that, in a week when their best player delivered one of her best performances of the season, was dominated by questions about whether the coach's praise was genuine or scripted. Those 2 trajectories, the competitive trajectory and the institutional trajectory, are currently moving in opposite directions. And that is the kind of organizational tension that does not resolve itself. It either gets addressed directly, with real behavioral consistency over time, or it compounds. Organizations that let it compound tend to look back later at a specific week, a specific sequence, a specific series of avoidable decisions, and understand that the moment they could have changed the narrative was right there, and they let it pass. The Fever front office reads the comments. They watch the engagement. They see what the fan community is saying because the evidence of their online awareness has been visible all season. So if they're watching, and they are, here is the message from Street Hoops delivered with complete clarity. You have everything you need to make this a great story. You have the player, you have the fan base, you have the momentum. The only thing standing between where you are now and where you could be is the organizational decision to close the gap between what you say at press conferences and what your actions have communicated all season. That gap is not invisible. The fans see it. The media sees it. The league office has formally documented it. Close the gap, let the coach coach, let the star play, file the reports on time, and let this be the week the story changed rather than the week it continued. Here is where I land on the Stephanie White press conference question, and I want to be honest rather than just spicy about it. Was that compliment genuine? Was it scripted? Was it reactive capitulation to sustained external pressure? I genuinely do not know what is in Stephanie White's heart when she talks about Caitlin Clark. I cannot verify internal conversations. I cannot tell you what happened in that building between the Mystics game and the Valkyries game that produced a measurably different public posture. What I can tell you is what the documented record shows. The documented record shows a coach who did not specifically name her franchise player after one of the most remarkable individual quarters in the team's recent history. The documented record shows a league warning, a fine, and a press conference that the internet immediately and unanimously read as externally compelled. And the documented record shows that the praise, when it finally came, was specific, composed, and substantively accurate about what Clark actually did on the court. Here is my actual opinion. It does not entirely matter whether it was genuine or forced. What matters is whether it is sustained. A single press conference, however positive its content, does not rebuild a credibility reserve that has been drawn down across weeks of documented omissions. What rebuilds that reserve is the same thing that depletes it: repeated behavior over time. If White consistently acknowledges Clark's performances, consistently gives the specific public recognition that the moment demands, and does so regardless of whether the fan community is currently amplifying the pressure, that becomes the new record. That is how trust gets rebuilt, not with one good press conference, but with 20. Clark, for her part, has handled all of this with a level of composure and intelligence that continues to impress me every week. She has not publicly complained. She has not thrown her coach under the bus. She has not made the organizational drama about herself, even when the organizational drama is entirely about her. She dropped 22 on an undefeated team, laughed about insane defensive standards in a way that broke the internet, and let the record speak for itself. That is what a superstar does. That is why 3 million people voted for her, not because she is the loudest voice in the room, but because when she steps on the court, she makes you forget every single piece of drama that surrounds her. That is everything I've got for you today, and we went absolutely all in on this one. Organizational behavior analysis, film room turnover breakdown, the viral quote breakdown, the league warning, and the fine in the same week. White's press conference under the microscope. We left nothing on the table. Now here is what I need from you right now. Smash that like button. Do it now, do it hard. The algorithm needs to know this content hits different. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Stephanie White's Clark praise was genuine recalibration, or was it pure damage control? Do you think the turnovers are a Clark problem or a system problem? And what does this fever organization need to do right now to close the gap between the competitive trajectory and the institutional one? All of your thoughts, all of your opinions, no filter, drop it below. And if you are not subscribed to Street Hoops yet, why are you making things harder than they need to be? Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. We are not done with this story, not even close. And you do not want to miss the next chapter. Dre Fiverr, Street Hoops, we out.